My name is Boyd Wilson, 68 years old, living quietly in my modest Pennsylvania home since retiring as a construction foreman. Never thought things with my son Jackson would end up this way. I gave him everything, worked my fingers to the bone, even after his mother died from cancer. That dinner party changed everything. 15 slaps across my weathered face, each one cutting deeper than the last. His words hurt worse. "Shut up, you parasite." But what he found in that drawer the next morning, that changed everything. If you're watching this story right now, let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about family, sacrifice, and redemption. Before I reveal what documents changed everything between us, let me take you back to where it all began. I was born and raised in Milltown, Pennsylvania. Just another blue-collar kid whose father worked at the steel mill until his lungs couldn't take it anymore. From the age of 16, I knew construction would be my path. I was good with my hands, could read blueprints like they were Sunday comics, and wasn't afraid of honest work. For 43 years, I poured concrete, framed houses, and eventually managed crews of 30 men across 3 counties. My hands tell that story better than words ever could, calloused and permanently stained with the memory of honest labor. I met Margaret during my second year on the job. She was working as a receptionist at the lumber supplier. Always had this smile that lit up the whole place. 3 months after our first date, I asked her to marry me right there in the parking lot of that same lumber yard. We didn't have much, just a small apartment and big dreams, but it was enough. Jackson came along 2 years later, our miracle baby after doctors told Margaret she might never conceive. That boy became the center of our universe. Margaret would read to him every night, and I'd take him to job sites on weekends, letting him wear my too big hard hat. He was so curious, always asking questions about everything. "Why does concrete need rebar, Dad? How do you know where to put the walls?" I'd explain it all, and he'd soak it up like a sponge. When Jackson was 11, Margaret started getting tired all the time. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt. Stage 3 breast cancer. She fought for 5 years before it spread to her bones and lungs. Through it all, Jackson and I became a team, taking care of her, handling the household, becoming even closer. Those were hard years, but somehow, we made it work. Jackson was 16 when Margaret passed. After the funeral, it was just him and me figuring out life without her. I promised Margaret I'd make sure he got to college, got the education neither of us had. So I picked up extra shifts, took weekend jobs, anything to start building that college fund. Jackson did his part too, studying hard, graduating top of his class. When those acceptance letters started coming in, including one from an Ivy League school, I nearly burst with pride. The scholarship covered about half, and my savings took care of another quarter. For the rest, I took out a second mortgage on our small house. "Dad, are you sure?" Jackson asked, concern in his eyes. I just nodded and said, "Your mom would want this. Go make us proud." College changed him. Each time he came home, I noticed something different. His accent, the way he dressed, the friends he mentioned. It wasn't bad, just different. By junior year, he was talking about law school. That hadn't been the plan, but he was so passionate about it. "I can help people, Dad, and make a real difference," he said. How could I say no to that? Law school meant more loans, more second jobs for me. By then, my back was starting to give out after decades of construction work, but I kept going. Jackson graduated with honors, landed an internship at a prestigious firm in Philadelphia, and started climbing that corporate ladder faster than I could keep track. That's when he met Sophia. She came from money, old money. Her father was a senior partner at a competing firm. Her mother ran some charity foundation. Their wedding was something else, held at her parents' country club. I rented a tuxedo and tried not to look too out of place among all those people who'd never worked with their hands a day in their lives. Over the next few years, Jackson and Sophia had 2 beautiful children, Ethan and Lily. I'd drive 2 hours each way every other weekend to see them, bringing small gifts I could afford. Being a grandfather was the greatest joy of my life. Ethan had my eyes, people said, and Lily had Margaret's laugh. Hearing that sound again after so many years would bring tears to my eyes. As I approached retirement age, the physical toll of construction work became impossible to ignore. Arthritis locked up my fingers each morning, and the doctor said my heart wasn't what it used to be. Nothing serious, he assured me. Just needed to take it easier. After 43 years, I finally hung up my hard hat. With a modest pension and Social Security that barely covered the bills. It was around this time that Jackson made an offer that seemed like an answer to prayers. "Dad, we're thinking you should move closer to us. There's a guest house on our property. You could see the kids more, and when Sophia and I travel for work, you could help out." The idea of seeing my grandchildren regularly, of being useful again, was too good to pass up. I sold my small house, paid off the remaining mortgage, and moved into Jackson's guest house with what little furniture and savings I had left. The first few months seemed promising. I'd have breakfast with the family most mornings, take the kids to the park in the afternoons when they weren't in their various activities. But slowly, I started noticing things. How Sophia would wince when I used the wrong fork at dinner, how Jackson would cut me off mid-story if his colleagues were around, how the invitations to family meals became less frequent. At 68 years old, I found myself once again hoping things would get better, that this distance between us was just temporary. I couldn't have been more wrong. The guest house behind Jackson and Sophia's sprawling colonial home was nice enough, all things considered. It had a small kitchenette, a bedroom with an attached bath, and a sitting area with a television. More space than I needed, really. But the 20 steps from the guest house to the main house might as well have been 20 miles, given how isolated I often felt. I tried to make myself useful around the property. Decades in construction meant I could fix just about anything, so I took care of the leaky faucets, the sticking doors, the uneven deck boards. Sophia never said thank you directly, just nodded with tight lips when I'd mention a repair was complete. Once, I overheard her telling her friend on the phone, "He insists on tinkering with everything. I've told Jackson we should just call professionals, but he says it makes his father feel useful." Jackson's transformation continued to puzzle me. The boy who once proudly wore my oversized work boots now seemed embarrassed by my work-worn hands and simple vocabulary. At dinners, when I'd use the phrase, "ain't that something," or "you betcha," I'd catch that look between him and Sophia, that silent communication of shared embarrassment. The grandchildren were my saving grace. 7-year-old Ethan loved hearing stories about building things, and 4-year-old Lily would curl up next to me on the couch for hours while I read her favorite books. But even this joy came with complications. "Dad, we're trying to limit their screen time," Jackson would say when he'd find me watching cartoons with them. Or, "Dad, we don't give them sugary snacks," when I'd sneak them a cookie. Money was a constant undercurrent in our strained relationship. Jackson had never explicitly acknowledged the financial sacrifices I'd made for his education. Over 15 years, I'd contributed most of my savings and taken on significant debt to put him through undergraduate and law school. It wasn't something I held over his head, but his apparent amnesia about it stung. Living in the guest house rent-free was positioned as Jackson's generosity, not as the least he could do after I'd bankrupted myself for his future. Whenever I tried to contribute financially, offering grocery money or to pay utilities, Sophia would laugh it off. "That's sweet, Boyd, but your Social Security check wouldn't cover a week of our expenses." Her words weren't meant to be cruel, I think, just factual. But facts can cut deep, too. As months passed, I took on more childcare responsibilities. Sophia's social obligations and Jackson's frequent work trips meant the children were often left in my care. I treasured this time, but it became clear I was viewed more as free labor than beloved grandfather. "We're saving a fortune on nannies," I once overheard Sophia tell a friend on the phone. That one stuck with me for days. The first major incident occurred about 6 months after I moved in. I was helping prepare for one of Sophia's garden parties, carrying a tray of her expensive crystal glasses to the patio. My arthritic hand spasmed, and I dropped the tray. The sound of shattering glass was deafening in the perfect kitchen. Sophia came running, her face transforming from concern to cold fury when she saw what had happened. "Those were Waterford crystal, Boyd, a wedding gift from my parents." Her voice was controlled, tight. I'm so sorry. I'll replace them, I offered, already knowing my entire monthly Social Security check couldn't buy a single one of those glasses. Just leave it. The housekeeper will clean it up. She turned away, adding, maybe it's best if you stick to watching the children. Less chance of breaking irreplaceable things. That night, I heard Jackson and Sophia arguing about me. Their voices carried through the garden to my open window. Your father is becoming a problem, Jackson. My friends are asking questions about why he's always here. What am I supposed to do? He's my father. He has nowhere else to go. You could look into those nice retirement communities. The one in Cherry Hill has activities. People his own age. We can't afford that. Not with private school tuition and the club membership. Well, something needs to change. He's just so present all the time. I closed my window, but couldn't shut out the truth of what I'd heard. I was an inconvenience, a burden. The next morning, I started taking longer walks around the neighborhood during the day, making myself less present in their perfect home. Attempts to discuss the situation with Jackson were met with defensiveness. Dad, you're imagining things. Sophia loves having you here. The kids adore you, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine, and the conversation would quickly shift to something else. I withdrew more into myself, spending evenings alone in the guest house. I'd watch old westerns, the kind Margaret and I used to enjoy together, and wonder what she would make of how things had turned out. Our son, so successful by conventional measures, but somehow missing the most important lessons we'd tried to teach him about family, respect, and remembering where you came from. The breaking point came during a casual Sunday dinner, just the family. Ethan had been struggling with a math problem, and I'd spent the afternoon helping him work through it, drawing on my years of calculating measurements and angles on construction sites. Grandpa showed me an easy way to figure it out, Ethan announced proudly at dinner. Jackson put down his fork. What did he teach you? Ethan demonstrated the practical method I'd shown him for understanding fractions. That's not how they teach math now, Dad, Jackson said, his voice tight. Ethan, tomorrow we'll work on the proper method, the way your teacher wants you to learn it. But Grandpa's way makes sense, Ethan protested. Grandpa didn't go to college, son. There's a reason they teach it differently now. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at my plate, face burning with shame. Not because I hadn't gone to college, but because my son thought that made my knowledge worthless. In that moment, I questioned everything about my decision to move closer to them. Later that night, Jackson came to the guest house, ostensibly to apologize. Dad, about dinner. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it then? I asked, too tired to pretend anymore. It's just, education has changed, methods have improved, and a lifetime of practical experience counts for nothing. He sighed, frustrated. That's not what I said. Look, we have an important dinner party coming up next weekend. Some senior partners from the firm. It would mean a lot if you'd join us, be part of the family evening. The olive branch, however inadequate, seemed worth accepting. Sure, Jackson. I'll be there. Great. And, maybe wear that blue button-up shirt Sophia got you for Christmas? It looks professional. As he left, I wondered if Margaret would even recognize the man our son had become. The dinner party invitation wasn't about reconciliation, I realized. It was about appearance, the dutiful son, taking care of his aging father. Another performance in Jackson's carefully curated life. The night of the dinner party arrived with an unusual flurry of activity at the main house. From my window in the guest house, I could see catering vans and florist deliveries coming and going all day. Sophia had hired extra household help for the evening, including uniformed servers. This wasn't just any dinner party, it was a production. I spent extra time getting ready, knowing how important this was to Jackson. I showered carefully, trimmed my silver beard, and put on the blue button-up shirt Sophia had given me, along with my only pair of khaki slacks that didn't show wear at the knees. Looking in the mirror, I saw a clean, presentable older man, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being an actor in costume, playing a role I hadn't auditioned for. At exactly 6:30, I made the short walk from the guest house to the main house. Jackson met me at the back door, looking me over with a critical eye. "You look nice, Dad," he said, though his expression suggested he'd hoped for better. "Just remember, these are important clients. Try to keep the construction stories to a minimum, okay?" "I know how to behave at a dinner party, son," I replied, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. The formal dining room had been transformed. The long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier light, set with china I'd never seen them use before. Elaborate floral arrangements dominated the center, and each place setting featured multiple glasses and more silverware than I knew what to do with. Soft, classical music played from hidden speakers, and the smell of expensive cuisine filled the air. Guests began arriving at 7, each more polished than the last. The men wore tailored suits that probably cost more than my annual pension, the women in elegant dresses with jewelry that caught the light. They air-kissed Sophia and shook Jackson's hand firmly, exchanging insider jokes about cases and clients. I stood awkwardly to the side until Jackson finally remembered to introduce me. "And this is my father, Boyd," he'd say, as though explaining a peculiar antique in the room. The guests would smile politely, ask the obligatory questions about my health, then quickly return to conversations about summer homes and boarding schools. The older gentleman seated to my right at dinner was Walter Thompson, apparently a senior partner, considering Jackson for partnership. He asked what I'd done before retirement, and I explained my years in construction management. "Honest work," he said with a nod that felt more like dismissal than respect. "My father started as a plumber before law school, pulled himself up, made something of himself." The implication stung, as though what I'd done for 43 years wasn't making something of myself. Dinner progressed through multiple courses, each served with a different wine. I sipped water, mindful of my heart medication, while conversation flowed around me. Topics ranged from recent Supreme Court decisions to exclusive private schools to vacation properties in the Hamptons. When politics came up, the consensus around the table was clear and very different from the working-class perspectives I'd grown up with. During a discussion about minimum wage legislation, I made the mistake of speaking up. Seems to me people working full-time should be able to afford rent and food without needing government assistance. The table fell momentarily silent before Walter Thompson cleared his throat. "While that sentiment is admirable, it fails to account for market realities and the burden on small business owners." Jackson jumped in quickly. "Dad's generation has a different perspective on labor issues," he said with a tight smile, effectively dismissing my opinion as outdated. I focused on my plate after that, carefully navigating the unfamiliar silverware. When the servers began clearing the dinner plates, I instinctively stacked mine with the one next to me, a lifetime habit from helping Margaret after family meals. Sophia noticed immediately, her eyes widening in horror. "Boyd, please, the staff will handle that," she said sharply, then forced a laugh for the table. My father-in-law is always trying to help. As dessert was served, I tried once more to engage, mentioning my grandchildren as a safe topic. "Ethan's quite the mathematician," I said proudly, "and Lily has her grandmother's artistic talent." This opened the door to a flood of competitive parenting from around the table, each guest outdoing the last with tales of their children's exceptional abilities and achievements. Tennis champions, piano prodigies, fluency in multiple languages by age 6. I thought of adding that Ethan could identify every type of construction vehicle by age 3, but held my tongue. As coffee was served, Jackson began telling the table about his recent victory in a complex corporate case. In his telling, he single-handedly saved the client millions through a brilliant legal strategy. I remembered the late-night calls during that case, how stressed he'd been, how I'd sat with him in his home office providing a sounding board as he worked through options. None of that featured in his story. When the other guests began sharing war stories of their own legal triumphs, the competitiveness in the room became palpable. Jackson, perhaps feeling pressure to impress Walter Thompson further, began embellishing his achievements. When he claimed to have put himself through law school with scholarships and hard work, something broke inside me. "You had help, son," I said quietly, not intending for the whole table to hear. "Remember those loans I took out? The second mortgage?" Jackson's face flushed deep red. "Dad, We're talking about Bannister v. Continuum Corp., not ancient history. Not that ancient. I just made the final payment 3 years ago, I said, then immediately regretted it. Jackson excused himself abruptly and gestured for me to follow him into the hallway. Once out of earshot of the guests, his controlled facade cracked. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Why would you bring up financials at the table?" "I didn't mean to embarrass you," I said truthfully. "But you're telling stories like you did it all alone. This is not the time or place for this conversation. These people are deciding my partnership next month, and the truth about your father helping you would hurt that." His jaw tightened. "Just, please, go back in there and keep quiet for the rest of the evening. We'll talk tomorrow." We returned to the table, the brief absence noted but not remarked upon by the guests. I sipped my coffee in silence while conversation resumed around me. When Walter Thompson asked about Jackson's rise from humble beginnings, I stared into my cup, saying nothing. As the evening drew to a close, Sophia suggested moving to the living room for digestives. I followed the group, taking a seat in a corner armchair, trying to be unobtrusive. The children had been allowed to come down briefly to say goodnight to the guests, and seeing Ethan and Lily in their pajamas, freshly scrubbed and sleepy-eyed, was the first genuine moment of joy I'd felt all evening. Lily climbed into my lap without hesitation, snuggling against my chest as she often did before bedtime. "Tell me a story, Grandpa," she whispered, grateful for this small normalcy. I began telling her about when her father was her age, how he'd loved building forts from sofa cushions and blankets. "Your daddy was so creative," I told her. "He once built a fort that took up the entire living room. Your grandma and I had to crawl through a tunnel just to watch TV." Lily giggled, and I noticed several guests smiling at the sweet interaction. Jackson, however, was watching with increasing agitation. When I mentioned how I'd taught Jackson to use basic tools by age 6, building a birdhouse together, he strode across the room. "Lily, time for bed. Say goodnight to everyone," he said, his voice tight. "But Grandpa's telling me about when you were little," she protested. "Now, Lily," he insisted, lifting her from my lap. As she was led away, I heard her ask, "Daddy, did you really build birdhouses with Grandpa?" Jackson's response was too quiet to hear, but the set of his shoulders told me everything. He was erasing our shared past, rewriting his origin story to fit his current image. The working-class father who sacrificed everything didn't belong in the narrative of Jackson Wilson, soon to be partner at Thompson, Blackwell, and Hayes. The evening continued for another painful hour. As guests prepared to leave, handshakes and business cards were exchanged, promises of golf games and dinner reciprocation made. I stood awkwardly in the background, a relic from a past Jackson was trying to forget. When the last guest had departed, Sophia immediately began critiquing the evening with Jackson, dissecting each interaction for hidden meanings and partnership implications. I moved to help the catering staff clean up, but Sophia cut me off. "Boyd, please, they're paid professionals. You'll just get in the way." That was when Jackson, loosened by several glasses of expensive scotch, turned his frustration on me. "What were you thinking? Bringing up loans and mortgages at a partner dinner? Do you have any idea how that made me look?" "I was just telling the truth," I said, exhaustion making me less diplomatic than I should have been. "You seem to have forgotten all the sacrifices that got you where you are." "Sacrifices?" His voice rose. "You mean doing the bare minimum a parent should do? Supporting their child's education?" The injustice of his words knocked the wind from me. "Bare minimum? Jackson, I worked 2 jobs for 15 years. I delayed retirement. I'm still paying medical bills because I put off my own care to make your tuition payments. Here we go." He threw up his hands, looking at Sophia. The martyr routine. Poor Dad, working his fingers to the bone for ungrateful me. "It's not about gratitude," I said, my own voice rising now. "It's about honesty, about remembering where you came from." "Where I came from?" Jackson laughed bitterly. "A small town with nothing going for it. A father who never went to college. Do you think Walter Thompson would be considering me for partner if he really knew where I came from?" Sophia stepped between us. "This isn't productive. Boyd, perhaps you should go back to the guest house. We'll discuss this tomorrow when everyone's calmer." But Jackson wasn't finished. "No, Let's discuss it now. Let's talk about how he shows up here, embarrasses me in front of the senior partners, and then plays the victim. I've never played the victim, I said quietly. Everything I did for you, I did willingly. Because I loved you. Because your mother and I wanted more for you than we had. But we never wanted you to become ashamed of us in the process. Something in Jackson snapped at the mention of his mother. Don't you dare bring Mom into this. She would understand what I've accomplished, what I'm trying to build for my family. Your mother valued honesty above all else, I reminded him. She wouldn't recognize the man you've become. In retrospect, those words were the match that lit the explosion, but I couldn't have predicted what would happen next. Shut up, you parasite. Jackson's voice erupted, bouncing off the expensive wallpaper and hardwood floors of the dining room. The remaining catering staff froze, then quickly made themselves scarce, leaving through the kitchen door with uncomfortable backward glances. Before I could process his words, Jackson closed the distance between us. The first slap caught me entirely off guard, a stinging blow across my left cheek that snapped my head to the side. Sophia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. 15 years, Jackson seethed, delivering another slap. 15 years I've been carrying you. Another slap, harder this time. Living in my guest house. Slap. Eating my food. Slap. Embarrassing me in front of my colleagues. Slap. Each blow corresponded to a perceived grievance, as though he'd been tallying them silently for months, years even. Some rational part of my mind noted that his accounting was entirely backward, but I couldn't find my voice to correct him. Interfering with my children. Slap. Undermining my authority. Slap. Making Sophia uncomfortable in her own home. Slap. I didn't raise my hands to defend myself. Somewhere in my stunned mind, I recognized this man was still my son. The baby I'd cradled through colic. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike. The teenager I'd comforted through his first heartbreak. Even as his palm connected with my face for the 10th, 11th, 12th time, I couldn't bring myself to push him away. Playing the martyr. Slap. Acting superior because you worked with your hands. Slap. Making me feel guilty for my success. Slap. The 15th slap was the hardest, a backhand that split my lip. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth as Jackson stood before me, chest heaving, eyes wild with a rage I'd never seen before. Jackson. Sophia finally intervened, grabbing his arm as he raised it again. Stop it! The children! Only then did I notice Ethan and Lily standing in the doorway in their pajamas, eyes wide with terror. Ethan clutched his sister protectively, his small face a mask of confusion and fear. Lily was crying silently, fat tears rolling down her cheeks. Daddy hurt Grandpa, she whimpered. The sound of his daughter's distress seemed to penetrate Jackson's rage. He looked at his raised hand as if seeing it for the first time, then at my face. Whatever he saw there made him step back, his expression shifting from anger to something more complicated. I touched my lip, my fingers coming away bloody. My cheek throbbed where a ring on Jackson's hand had caught the skin, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the wound inside my chest. My son, my only child, the boy I'd given everything for, had just struck me 15 times in front of witnesses, including his own children. With as much dignity as I could muster, I straightened my posture and looked directly at Jackson. I didn't speak, just held his gaze long enough to see the first flicker of shame cross his features. Then I turned to my grandchildren. It's okay, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady despite my split lip. Grandpa and your daddy just had a disagreement. Everything's going to be all right. Sophia moved quickly to the children. Back to bed now, she said firmly, shooting Jackson a look I couldn't interpret before ushering Ethan and Lily upstairs. Alone with my son, I finally spoke. I never thought I'd see the day when you'd raise a hand to me. Jackson looked at his palm, now marked with a smear of my blood. Dad, he began, but seemed unable to find words to continue. Save it, I said quietly. Whatever you're about to say won't undo what just happened. I moved past him toward the door, my legs surprisingly steady despite the trembling in my core. At the threshold, I paused but didn't turn around. Your mother would be heartbroken, I said, then walked out into the night. The cool evening air felt good against my swollen face as I walked slowly back to the guest house. The full moon illuminated the manicured lawn and gardens, this perfect setting that had never felt like home. Halfway across the yard, I stopped and looked up at the stars. The same stars I'd pointed out to Jackson on camping trips when he was small. We'd lie in sleeping bags, and I'd tell him stories about constellations while Margaret made hot chocolate on the camp stove. Where had that little boy gone? When had he transformed into the stranger who'd just struck his father 15 times? Instead of going to the guest house, I found myself walking past it, down the long driveway, and onto the quiet suburban street beyond. My feet carried me without conscious direction, moving on autopilot while my mind replayed those terrible moments in an endless loop. Each slap had connected with a different memory. His 5th birthday, when I'd saved for months to buy him the bicycle he wanted. His high school graduation, Margaret already gone. Just the two of us hugging afterward, both trying not to cry for different reasons. The day he got his law school acceptance letter, how proud I'd been despite knowing what it would cost. The birth of Ethan, holding my grandson for the first time while Jackson beamed beside me. How had we arrived here, with violence between us? What had I done, or failed to do, that led to such hatred? I walked for hours, despite the growing pain in my arthritic knee. The physical discomfort was almost welcome, a distraction from the deeper ache. Eventually, I found myself in a small park, where I sat on a bench and finally allowed the tears to come. At 68 years old, I wept openly under the moonlight, mourning the son I thought I knew, the relationship I thought we had. When the tears subsided, a strange calm settled over me. The decision I needed to make became suddenly crystalline clear. I couldn't stay. Whatever bonds had kept us together through the years had been severed tonight with those 15 slaps. There was nothing left to preserve. I returned to the guest house well after midnight. The main house was dark, everyone presumably asleep. Inside my small living space, I methodically began packing essential belongings: clothes, toiletries, the few mementos of Margaret I still possessed, her wedding ring on its chain around my neck, the family photo albums I'd brought with me. As I packed, I came across a battered metal box in the back of my closet. I hadn't opened it in years, but tonight it called to me. Inside were important documents I'd need: my birth certificate, social security card, Medicare information. But beneath these were other papers I'd almost forgotten. Mortgage documents showing the second loan on my modest house. Bank statements reflecting withdrawn retirement funds. Medical bills I'd deferred paying to cover Jackson's law school expenses. There were other items, too. Letters Margaret had written to Jackson before she died, entrusting him to my care, expressing her pride in the man he was becoming. Jackson's childhood drawings, many featuring stick figures labeled me and Dad building things together. Cards he'd made for me through the years. World's best dad in crayon. Thank you for everything in teenage handwriting. I couldn't have done it without you. After law school graduation. Most significant was a handwritten agreement Jackson had drafted during his first year of law school, when I'd expressed concern about depleting my retirement savings. I, Jackson Wilson, hereby promise to ensure my father's comfort and security in his retirement years in recognition of his sacrifices for my education. He'd signed it with a flourish, then insisted I keep it, though we'll never need it, Dad, because taking care of you will be my privilege. Looking at these artifacts of our former relationship, I made another decision. I gathered the most significant papers, the proof of my sacrifices and Jackson's former gratitude, and placed them in a folder. Tomorrow, I would leave this folder where Jackson would find it, not as a guilt trip, but as a reminder of truth, of history that couldn't be slapped away. With methodical care, I tended to my split lip and bruised face, wincing at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. An old man, battered by the son he'd raised, the final indignity in what had become a string of them. By 4 a.m, my essential belongings were packed in 2 duffel bags and a small suitcase. I wrote a brief note to Jackson, avoiding accusations or emotional appeals. I'm leaving. This isn't working for either of us. I'll be in touch about seeing the grandchildren once I'm settled somewhere new. Boyd. No dad, no love, just my name, as though we were strangers. Perhaps we were. I placed this note on the kitchen counter of the guest house, where he'd see it when he came looking. Beside it, I left the key he'd given me when I moved in. Then I placed the folder of documents on the table in the main house's kitchen, where he'd find it when he came down for coffee. My final communication, letting the papers speak for themselves. As dawn broke, I called a taxi service and waited at the end of the long driveway with my bags. When the car arrived, I took one last look at the beautiful house where I'd never belonged, then got in and asked the driver to take me to the bus station. At 68 years old, with limited funds and a bruised face, I was starting over. The Greyhound bus station was already busy, despite the early hour. Shift workers coming and going, college students with oversized backpacks, elderly travelers like myself, clutching tickets and looking slightly confused at the electronic departure boards. I purchased a ticket to Allentown, a smaller city about 60 miles away, figuring it was far enough to prevent accidental encounters but close enough that visiting my grandchildren wouldn't require elaborate planning if that possibility remained. My face drew curious glances from fellow passengers, the bruising now more pronounced, my split lips swollen. I kept my eyes down, focusing on the worn tile floor or my ticket, avoiding conversation. The last thing I needed was well-meaning questions I couldn't answer honestly. How do you tell a stranger your only son slapped you 15 times the night before? The bus was half empty, allowing me a row to myself. As we pulled away from the station, a numbness settled over me, a defensive mechanism against fully processing what had happened and what lay ahead. I was 68 years old with limited savings, uncertain housing prospects, and no family support system. The practical challenges loomed large, temporarily overshadowing the emotional devastation. In Allentown, I found a modest motel on the outskirts of town that rented rooms by the week at a rate that wouldn't immediately deplete my savings. The room was clean if Spartan, with a double bed, small table with 2 chairs, mini fridge, microwave, and a bathroom with a shower stall. It would do for now. After settling in, I walked to a nearby diner for a late breakfast, keeping my face angled away from the waitress as I ordered coffee and eggs. Back in my room, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I lay down fully clothed and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep that lasted until evening. Waking disoriented, it took several moments to remember where I was and why. The events of the previous night crashed back like a physical blow. I checked my phone, half expecting missed calls or text messages from Jackson. But there was nothing. Had he even discovered I was gone yet? Did he care? The next few days established a simple routine. I'd walk to the diner for breakfast, pick up essentials from the drugstore or supermarket, then return to my room to rest my aching knee and consider next steps. I bought a local newspaper and circled apartment listings, but the reality of my financial situation quickly became apparent. My Social Security and modest pension would barely cover rent and utilities for even the cheapest one-bedroom apartments, leaving little for food, medication, or other necessities. On the 4th day, my phone finally chimed with a text message from an unexpected source. Sophia, the children are asking for you. Jackson told them you went on a trip. When will you be back? No mention of the violence, the humiliation, the reason for my trip. I waited several hours before responding. I won't be coming back to the guest house. Please tell Ethan and Lily I love them very much. Almost immediately, my phone rang. Jackson's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He tried twice more before leaving a message. Dad, where are you? We need to talk about what happened. I wasn't myself. Please call me back. I didn't call back. Instead, I texted simply, I need time. That evening, I received another text, this one from Jackson. I found the papers you left. Dad, I don't know what to say. I imagined him sitting at the kitchen table, the folder open before him, confronted with physical evidence of my sacrifices and his former gratitude. The mortgage documents showing how I'd leveraged my only asset to fund his education. The medical records revealing I'd delayed treatment for my own health issues to make tuition payments. The letters and cards reflecting a relationship that had once been built on love and mutual respect, rather than resentment and class embarrassment. There's nothing to say. I texted back. Those papers are just the truth. Jackson called immediately. This time, with great reluctance, I answered. Dad, where are you staying? Let me come get you. This is crazy. I'm safe. That's all you need to know right now. The things in that folder. I had no idea you'd mortgaged the house a second time. Or delayed your knee surgery for 3 years. You never asked, I said simply. His voice broke slightly. The letter Mom wrote, about how proud she was of me taking care of you someday. Dad, I've failed her. Failed you both. Yes, I agreed. Not out of cruelty but honesty. You have. Let me make it right. Come back. We'll figure this out. It's not that simple, Jackson. You struck me 15 times in front of your children. You called me a parasite. Some things can't be undone. His breathing hitched. I was drunk. Stressed about the partnership. I didn't mean it. Alcohol doesn't create feelings, son. It just removes the filter that stops us from expressing them. That's not true. I don't think of you as a parasite. I was just angry. Angry enough to hit your father repeatedly? That's not anger, Jackson. That's something much deeper and more troubling. There was a long silence before he spoke again. The kids keep asking when Grandpa's coming home. Lily had a nightmare about me hitting you. The thought of my granddaughter's distress made my heart ache. I'm sorry to hear that. She should talk to a counselor. Witnessing domestic violence affects children deeply. Domestic violence? Dad, it wasn't. I mean, I know I hit you. But what? If you'd done the same to Sophia, what would you call it? Another long silence. Where are you staying? At least tell me that. I'm in a motel until I figure out next steps. A motel? Dad, you don't have the money for that long term. I'll help you find an apartment. Pay the security deposit. I don't want your money, Jackson. I need to stand on my own. Is this about pride? After everything that's happened? It's about dignity. Something I started losing the moment I moved into your guest house. I heard him exhale sharply. I'm coming to see you tomorrow. Just tell me where. No, I'm not ready for that. Dad, please. I have the key to the guest house. I can bring your things. That key doesn't fit anymore, Jackson. Not the door. Not our relationship. What does that mean? His voice had an edge of panic now. It means some things, once broken, can't simply be repaired by inserting the same old key and turning it. Trust is one of those things. So that's it? 15 years of me being an ungrateful son, and now I lose my father forever because of one terrible night. I sighed, suddenly bone-tired. No, Jackson, this isn't about punishment or permanent estrangement. It's about consequences and boundaries. I need time and space to figure out who I am, apart from being your father, and what kind of relationship I can have with you moving forward. How long? I don't know. But I'll contact you about arrangements to see the grandchildren once I'm settled. Before ending the call, I added one thing. Jackson, those papers in the folder aren't meant as a guilt trip. They're history, our shared history. Something you seem to have forgotten or rewritten. Sometimes we need reminders of where we've been to understand where we are. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, emotionally drained. For the first time since leaving, I allowed myself to fully feel the loss, not just of my housing situation or financial security, but of the illusion that my son respected me, valued my sacrifices, saw me as more than an inconvenience in his carefully constructed life. The folder of documents had forced Jackson to confront reality, but I harbored no illusions that this alone would transform him. Real change, if it came, would require more than a moment of remorse. It would demand sustained reflection and action, a fundamental shift in values I wasn't sure my son was capable of anymore. That night, I dreamed of Margaret. We were sitting on the porch of our small house, much younger, watching Jackson play in the yard. He'll be fine, she told me, her hand warm in mine. And so will you. I woke with tears on my pillow but a curious lightness in my chest. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the same resilience that had carried me through a lifetime of challenges. 1 week passed in the monotony of motel living. I established a frugal routine, brewing coffee in the room rather than buying it at the diner, making sandwiches for lunch, splurging only on a hot dinner every other day. My face healed slowly, the bruises fading from purple to yellow, the split in my lip closing to a tender pink line. The physical wounds would disappear completely, given enough time. The emotional ones would take longer. Jackson texted daily, his messages evolving from urgent pleas for my return to more thoughtful reflections. Found your old tool belt in the garage today. Remember teaching me to hammer a nail without hitting my thumb? Or Ethan asked about the birdhouse story. I told him it was true, that you taught me how to build things. Small acknowledgments of our shared past, tentative bridges being extended. I responded occasionally, briefly, maintaining clear boundaries. Yes, you were a quick learner. Glad you told him the truth. Nothing that invited further conversation or suggested imminent reconciliation. On the 8th day in Allentown, a stroke of unexpected fortune came my way. While having coffee at the diner, I struck up a conversation with Eleanor, a 72-year-old widow who owned the establishment. Learning of my construction background, she mentioned problems with her historic Victorian home that multiple contractors had failed to resolve. The quotes they give me are highway robbery, she confided, and half the time they don't even show up for the appointment. I'd be happy to take a look, I offered. No charge. Sometimes all you need is an experienced eye to spot what others are missing. That afternoon, I examined the persistent leak around her bathroom skylight that had defeated 3 previous repair attempts. The issue was obvious to someone who'd spent decades in construction. Improper flashing installation, combined with a subtle dip in the roof structure that channeled water toward rather than away from the seam. I can fix this, I told her. Materials would run about $100. Labor, well, that's negotiable. Eleanor studied me thoughtfully. You mentioned staying at the Westside Motel. Not planning to settle here permanently? I hesitated, then opted for honesty. Just taking things one day at a time right now. Had a situation with family that made my previous living arrangement untenable. She nodded, asking no further questions about that. I have a finished room above the garage. Private entrance, small kitchenette, full bath. Been sitting empty since my sister moved to Florida last year. Rent would be reasonable, especially if you're handy with repairs around an old house that's constantly falling apart. The offer seemed almost too fortuitous, making me wary. That's generous, but I wouldn't want to impose. Eleanor waved dismissively. Impose nothing. Good tenants are hard to find, and handymen who don't charge an arm and a leg are even rarer. I'm offering a fair business arrangement, not charity. We agreed I would look at the room the next day. It proved to be far more comfortable than the motel, with character and charm the sterile motel room lacked. Eleanor and I settled on a rent I could manage, with the understanding that my maintenance assistance around the property would be factored in. By the end of the week, I had moved into my new home. With housing secured, I turned my attention to income. My Social Security and pension covered basic expenses, but left nothing for emergencies or small luxuries. Through Eleanor's connections in the community, I began picking up handyman jobs for seniors and small businesses. Nothing strenuous enough to aggravate my knee or back, just the kind of skilled repairs younger contractors often overlooked as too small to bother with. Word spread quickly about the reliable older gentleman who showed up when promised, charged fairly, and cleaned up after himself. Soon I had steady work 2 or 3 days a week, enough to supplement my fixed income without overtaxing my aging body. As my circumstances stabilized, I finally felt ready to address the Jackson situation more directly. I called Sophia first, arranging to see the grandchildren on a Saturday when Jackson would be at a golf outing with clients. She seemed relieved, mentioning that Ethan and Lily had been asking for me constantly. Our reunion was both joyful and tearful. Lily launched herself into my arms the moment I arrived, clinging to my neck as though afraid I'd disappear again. Ethan, more reserved at 7, studied my face carefully. "Did Daddy hurt you bad?" he asked quietly when Sophia was in the kitchen. "We had a disagreement," I said carefully. "Sometimes adults make mistakes when they're angry. Your dad made a mistake. He made you go away," Lily said accusingly. "No, sweetheart. I decided to go away for a while. Sometimes people need space to think about things." We spent the afternoon playing board games and building with Lego, carefully avoiding deeper discussions of what had happened or when I might return permanently. Before leaving, I gave each child a small carved wooden animal I'd made during evening hours in my new room. Lily's rabbit and Ethan's bear were simple but made with love, and they clutched them like treasures. "I'll see you again soon," I promised, establishing a regular visitation schedule with Sophia. The following week, Jackson called. "Dad, we need to talk face to face, please." After consideration, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop, halfway between our locations. Neutral ground seemed important for this conversation. Jackson arrived, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, his usual polished appearance slightly frayed at the edges. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleep had been elusive. He carried a small duffel bag that I recognized as mine, presumably containing belongings I'd left behind in my hasty departure. After ordering coffee, we sat at a corner table, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. "You look well," he finally said. "I am well," I replied simply. "I found a place to live, picking up some handyman work to supplement my pension." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the key to the guest house. "I brought this, in case you wanted to come back. Everything's just as you left it." I looked at the key resting on the table between us, this small metal object that represented so much. "It doesn't fit anymore, Jackson," I said quietly. "The lock hasn't changed," he protested, "but everything else has. That key belongs to a time when I thought living in your guest house meant being part of your family, not an inconvenience to be tolerated or hidden away when convenient." He flinched visibly. "That's not fair. You were never just an inconvenience." "No? What was I then?" Because from where I stood, it seemed like my only value was free childcare and occasional home repairs. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of his teenage years. "I don't know how we got here, Dad. When did everything get so complicated between us? It was always complicated. The difference is that for years, I was willing to overlook the growing distance, the subtle condescension, the embarrassment you clearly felt about my presence in your polished life, until I couldn't anymore. The papers you left," he said, his voice lower now. "I had no idea about the second mortgage, or how you deferred your own medical care for my tuition. You never asked where the money came from, Jackson. You assumed it was there because you deserved it." He was silent for a long moment. "I've been telling the kids stories about when I was little, things we did together, the camping trips, the projects we built, trying to explain who you really are. Not just the grandfather they know. And who am I, according to these stories?" Jackson met my eyes directly for the first time. The man who taught me everything important, even if I forgot those lessons somewhere along the way. The father who never gave up on me, even when times were hardest. Something shifted in my chest, a small loosening of the tight knot I'd carried since the night of the dinner party. "Those stories are true. They happened. But they don't erase what happened that night, Jackson." "I know," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've started seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I did what I did, why I've treated you the way I have. It's not an excuse, but I think I've been terrified of ending up back where we started, of losing everything I've built. Somehow that fear turned into resentment toward you, because you remind me of where I came from. Where you came from isn't something to be ashamed of," I said firmly. "It's the foundation that made everything else possible." "I know that now," he nodded. "Or I'm starting to remember it at least." We talked for over 2 hours, covering ground we should have addressed years earlier. The growing distance after college, the class tensions with Sophia's family, the subtle ways I'd been pushed to the periphery of their lives. Jackson didn't defend his actions or minimize their impact, which surprised me. Perhaps therapy was already having an effect. Before we parted, he asked directly, "Will you ever come back? To the guest house?" "No," I said definitively. "That chapter is closed. But to be part of your lives in a meaningful way, that door remains open, if we can establish a relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation or convenience." Jackson nodded, accepting this boundary. "The partnership committee made their decision yesterday," he said, seemingly changing subjects. "Congratulations," I assumed. "I turned it down," he said, surprising me. "Or rather, I asked for a 1-year deferment, told them I needed to focus on family matters for a while." That's unexpected. Some things are more important than career advancement, he said, echoing words I'd spoken to him many times throughout his youth. It took 15 slaps and losing my father to remember that. As we prepared to leave, Jackson tried one last time, holding out the guest house key. Keep it, at least, as a reminder that you always have a place with us if you need it. I shook my head. Keep your key, Jackson. If we rebuild our relationship, it won't be by using old keys to old locks. We'll need to build something new together, something stronger and more honest. He pocketed the key without further protest, then hesitated before asking, "Can I hug you goodbye?" The question, so formal and cautious, underscored how damaged our relationship had become. But it also acknowledged my boundaries, my right to refuse physical contact after what had happened. I nodded, and he embraced me briefly, awkwardly. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "For everything." "I know," I replied. "That's the first step." Walking away, I felt neither the triumph of righteous indignation nor the weakness of premature forgiveness. Instead, I experienced something more nuanced, the dignity of having established clear boundaries and the cautious hope that, perhaps, my son was finally beginning to understand what truly mattered. 6 months passed, each day building upon the last like bricks in a foundation. My room above Eleanor's garage became a true home, decorated simply with a few cherished possessions and new acquisitions from thrift stores. The space reflected who I was, unpretentious, functional, with touches of craftsmanship in the wooden shelves I'd built and the refurbished rocking chair where I spent evenings reading. My handyman business expanded beyond simple repairs to include small renovation projects and woodworking commissions. Word had spread about the quality of my carved wooden animals, creating steady demand for birthday and holiday gifts. At 68, I'd inadvertently launched a modest second career that engaged my skills without overtaxing my body. Through an unexpected connection, I began consulting part-time at a vocational training program, teaching basic construction skills to young people seeking alternatives to college. Sharing knowledge accumulated over 40 years brought profound satisfaction, particularly when students mastered techniques that had taken me years to perfect. My relationship with the grandchildren stabilized into regular Saturday visits, sometimes with Jackson present, sometimes not. Ethan and Lily adjusted to the new arrangement with the resilience of youth, though occasionally Lily would ask wistfully when I would live with them again. "Grandpa has his own home now," I'd explain gently, "but I'll always be here for you." Jackson and I established a careful, deliberate rebuilding process. Our weekly phone calls evolved into occasional dinners, just the two of us, where conversation gradually became less guarded. He continued therapy, sometimes sharing insights about patterns of behavior he was working to change. I listened without judgment, offering perspective when asked, but respecting his journey as his own. Perhaps the most significant development came 4 months after my departure, when Jackson and Sophia invited me to Sunday dinner along with Sophia's parents. I'd never spent much time with her family, sensing their polite disdain for my working-class background. This dinner, however, felt markedly different. "Boyd, Jackson tells me you're consulting at the vocational center now," Sophia's father remarked. "Admirable work. Too many young people pursue degrees without considering skilled trades as a viable alternative." The conversation flowed more naturally than I'd ever experienced in that house, touching on my projects, their business ventures, shared concerns about educational opportunities for the grandchildren. No one spoke down to me or exchanged knowing glances when I used colloquial expressions. The subtle class barriers, while not entirely gone, had lowered significantly. After dinner, Sophia pulled me aside. "I want to apologize," she said directly. "I didn't understand the sacrifices you made for Jackson until I saw those papers, and I contributed to making you feel unwelcome in our home. That was wrong." Her acknowledgement surprised me with its sincerity. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. "The children miss you terribly," she added. "We all do, in different ways. Jackson most of all, though he struggles to express it. We're finding our way back to each other," I assured her. "It just needs to be on different terms than before." The family therapy sessions Jackson had mentioned in our coffee shop meeting had apparently continued, now including Sophia and occasionally the children in age-appropriate ways. Professional guidance helped navigate the complex emotions surrounding what the children had witnessed that night and the subsequent changes in family structure. Jackson made consistent, if sometimes awkward, efforts to demonstrate his changing perspective. He began volunteering at a community center in a working-class neighborhood, offering free legal advice to people who couldn't afford representation. He brought Ethan to visit my vocational class, proudly introducing me as my dad, the expert who's forgotten more about construction than most people will ever know. Small gestures accumulated. Jackson fixing the leaky faucet in my bathroom himself, rather than calling a plumber, asking my advice on handling a difficult workplace situation, showing me his childhood baseball mitt he'd kept all these years. None erased what had happened, but together they suggested genuine effort toward change. The most powerful moment came during a family dinner to celebrate my 69th birthday. Jackson had invited several of my old construction colleagues I hadn't seen in years, as well as Eleanor and some of my new friends from Allentown. After the meal, he stood to offer a toast. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate my father today," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "Many of you have known him longer than I have, and you understand what an extraordinary person he is." He turned to face me directly. "Dad, I spent too many years forgetting the foundation that made everything in my life possible. I was ashamed of where I came from, because I didn't understand that humble beginnings aren't something to escape, but something to honor." Several guests nodded in agreement as he continued. "You taught me how to measure twice and cut once, but somewhere along the way I stopped applying that wisdom to my relationships, to the things that truly matter." His voice broke slightly. "The night I struck you was the worst mistake of my life, not just because it drove you away, but because it represented the culmination of years of failing to see your true worth, your dignity, your importance in our lives." The room fell completely silent as Jackson raised his glass. "To my father, Boyd Wilson, a builder in every sense of the word. You built houses, you built a family, and now you're building a legacy through teaching others. I'm more proud to be your son than you could possibly know." I stood to embrace him, aware of the tears on both our faces but unashamed of them. The applause from our assembled friends and family affirmed what we both knew. Healing had begun, though the scars would always remain. In the months that followed, my independent life continued to develop alongside the gradually mending relationship with Jackson and his family. Eleanor became a close friend and occasional dinner companion, our shared experiences as widowed parents creating a foundation of understanding. My small apartment expanded with a workshop in her detached garage, where I created increasingly elaborate wooden toys and furniture for both pleasure and modest profit. The greatest joy came from my grandchildren's growing understanding of who I truly was, beyond Grandpa who lives in the guest house. They visited my workshop, learned to sand wood and handle simple tools under my supervision. Ethan showed particular aptitude for spatial reasoning and design, while Lily demonstrated surprising patience with detailed work for a child her age. "You're just like your grandfather," Jackson told Ethan one day as the boy completed a simple birdhouse, similar to the one we'd built together years ago. The pride in Jackson's voice when making this comparison reflected how far we'd come. Through this journey, I discovered truths about family, forgiveness, and self-respect that had eluded me for much of my life. The parent-child relationship must evolve as children mature, but evolution doesn't mean erasure of shared history or fundamental respect. Sacrifice for one's children is natural and right, but martyrdom that enables ingratitude benefits neither party. Most importantly, forgiveness is not a single moment of absolution, but a process that requires active participation from both the forgiver and the forgiven. I also learned that standing up for my own dignity, painful as it was, ultimately created the possibility for genuine healing rather than continued pretense. By refusing to return to a situation that diminished me, I forced a reckoning that might never have occurred otherwise. The 15 slaps that night were terrible, but they exposed a disease that had been growing unacknowledged for years. 1 year after that fateful dinner party, I sat on the porch of my small apartment on a perfect autumn evening. Eleanor had brought coffee, and we watched the sunset in companionable silence. My phone chimed with a text from Jackson, a photo of Ethan sleeping with the wooden bear I'd carved him, still his treasured possession after all these months. "You've come a long way," Eleanor observed, nodding toward the phone. "We all have," I replied. "Sometimes it takes breaking apart to build something stronger." She nodded, understanding the construction metaphor, like reframing a damaged wall instead of just patching over the cracks. "Exactly. The new structure looks different, but it's sounder than before." As twilight deepened into night, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. The parasite my son had denounced had become a teacher, a craftsman, a friend, and yes, still a father and grandfather, but on terms that honored rather than diminished me. The 15 slaps had left no visible marks, but they had irreversibly altered our family's story, ultimately for the better despite the pain they caused. The key to the guest house still didn't fit, nor would it ever again. But new doors had opened, with new keys forged in the difficult work of honesty, accountability, and mutual respect. Some relationships can only be saved by allowing them to transform completely, by releasing what they were to discover what they might become. What painful experiences transformed your family relationships? Have you ever had to establish boundaries with someone you love? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others who might be struggling with similar family challenges. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is stand in our truth, even when it hurts. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to build relationships based on dignity rather than dependence in your own life.